are Decatur, Dallas, Fort Worth, and KYJC, Commerce. Portions of KDKR programming do not necessarily reflect the views of this station, its management, or staff.
Prudent Money with Bob Brooks is sponsored by the Prudent Money Foundation on 91.3.
Well, are we about to start seeing some major change? Today we're going to take a look. Stay tuned for Prudent Money. Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. Thank you so much for joining me today. You know I do appreciate it. Well, we are facing potentially a big year of change. What will our country look like a year from now? Crown Financial CEO and author Chuck Bentley is here today to give us some insight. Chuck, great to have you on board today.
Well, Bob, it's great to be back with you, and I also want to say what a joy it was to get to meet face-to-face before Christmas in December and to continue to develop our friendship. It was a real honor for me.
Oh, that goes both ways, and boy, that seems like months ago, doesn't it?
It seems like a year ago, doesn't it?
It does. Well, let's talk a little bit about, thank you for those words. Thank you. I mean, it's definitely the same way. You wrote a book entitled Seven Grey Swans, and that book talks about 7 potential country-changing events that could occur over the next several years. From time to time, I'd like to have you talk about this, kind of review where we are in the development of some of these trends. What do you think about things overall?
Well, overall, I think there's more gray swans than we had 4 years ago when I wrote the book. I think that if I changed the title, it would be more like 14 gray swans. It seems like they're coming at us every day.
Yeah, or just a lot of trends, because it is amazing how things are changing. Let's start with the definition of a gray swan and a little further explanation of the book.
Well, a gray swan is an obvious danger that we tend to ignore. We sort of write it off. We know it's out there. It's in contrast to the black swan, which is unpredictable. A black swan is a devastating economic event that nobody saw coming. But a gray swan is something that it's sort of there. It's lurking in the shadows, and we say, it's never going to happen, so let's just move on. Those are the ones that I wrote about.
Sorry about that. I had a little problem with my mic. It was interesting what you said just a few minutes ago about how you would call it 14 gray swans. It seems like there's so many things that are just popping up that are definite risks. The market's not really paying attention to it. Everybody kind of goes, oh hum. But there's just a lot of things I think we got to really take seriously. And I call this a year of change really because of the elections. I think that this election year is going to be one for the ages. If Trump wins, some big game-changing events could happen that change the country. If Biden wins, or how about this one, if he doesn't even end up being the candidate and somebody that we don't even see coming, that could create some great change. Now, change also can be good or bad. However, it takes change to create the environment necessary for these gray swan events to really happen.
Well, I agree with you. It is going to be a year of change. And one thing that I pray for, and this is a comment that's truly agnostic to whether you're conservative or liberal, but we should pray for political stability. Because when instability occurs, Bob, as you know, it shakes the markets. And if our markets get shaken, if the good faith and confidence in the U.S. government to keep its promises ever falters, and the world doesn't believe us anymore, that will be a cataclysmic day for our country and for all of us. And so we should all pray that we have political stability. That's my prayer going into this election.
Well, I got to start with one question before we dive into the trends. Do you look at artificial intelligence as a potential gray swan? After all, it really could be used for good or bad. In fact, I think it's one of those things where we just really don't know that a whole lot about it. And, could it be the missing technology that's needed for some of these gray swans to occur?
Well, I think that's a great insight, Bob, and it's on my radar. I like to read about it, the pros and the cons. And when it first sort of hit the scene, it rattled the world, and certainly Elon Musk fired the warning signal that this could be devastating to civilization. And he still feels that it needs to have constraints and regulation put around it to prevent it from being harmful and destructive. But one of the trends that's happening with artificial intelligence is that it's been proven to be highly biased. It's really not intelligence. It's just quickly gathering the available data and putting it before us in a format that we can request quickly. It's amazingly fast. However, because it's biased, it's losing some of its luster. People are asking it questions and getting a political bias or an anti-Christian bias or a woke bias. And they're saying, if that happens, it's not going to be as prominent of adoption rate that people think. I have an account, and I find myself not using it very often. I don't know about you, Bob, but do you use it very often? Have you integrated it into your business practices at all?
Not at all. Not at all. In fact, I when I want to talk about it on the radio, I almost hate to bring it up because I'm unsure how much people really know about it. And I'll be the first to say, I'm kind of in the initial stages of really trying to research it.
Well, that's a common answer, that people are aware of it. They know it's a potential gray swan. It could be bad. And as you said, being fair, it could be good as well. But I don't see it as this massive job displacement tool right now that it was forecast to be. A lot of things get hyped, and they don't really turn out to be nearly as potent as people had projected, like autonomous driving. Right now, it doesn't look like that's going to take over the world. For a while, it was threatening to take over the world, but right now, I don't see that happening.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that because we talk a lot about that on the radio, because there's just the things that are standing in its way, in my opinion, just like you were talking about it a second ago. There's just absolutely no way with we can start with the infrastructure. It's definitely not there, and how long will it take to really build that out? But it just seems like that's something that has been built up over the years and really is pretty much impossible to get to the level that the politicians feel like it's going to get to.
Well, a friend of mine rented an electric vehicle on one of his vacations, and his wife told him she didn't want to, and he said, "Oh, it'll be great. We'll learn about it, blah, blah, blah." Well, he should have listened to his wife, because they ended up getting towed back to the place where they rented it because they couldn't find a charging station.
Yes.
And it was a nightmare. It was just a nightmare experience.
Yeah, about the same thing happened to a buddy of mine. He and his wife were going to California and got stuck in California traffic trying to look for a charging station at the same time. I mean, they barely made it. And once they got there, it took an hour and a half to wait in line and to get a charge. So I don't think that's going to be something that we're going to have to really keep on the radar, but definitely the artificial intelligence we'll want to keep on the radar. Let's talk a little bit about your first gray swan, about basic universal income. And this definitely, with a lot of the uncertainty, potential uncertainty of candidates, could be something that comes back up this year.
Well, you're exactly right. It's always popular around election time. The idea is so appealing that the government's just going to send everybody a monthly check. There'll be no requirements to earn it, no expectations of what you'll do with it. And the early studies were touting that, voila, this was just a silver bullet. Sending people money every month was going to eliminate poverty and take care of societal ills by closing the wealth gap. And there were all kinds of people saying that it was, going to be a great thing. Even the Pope endorsed it. Elon Musk said he thought it would be a great thing. It turns out it's not working so well. the latest is that there's only about 8 states in America that are really trying to implement it. And what they've done is they've started to limit it, particularly around the time frame. Like some states are saying, we'll do this for 6 months to help a person get back on their feet. It's no longer unlimited, like an ongoing promise that they'll get money in the mailbox for nothing every month.
Sure.
So I think we're sort of coming to our senses.
This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. Thank you so much for joining me today. You know I do appreciate it. Chuck Bentley is my guest today. He comes on once a month to give some ideas and thoughts on stewardship, and we talk a little bit about the markets. And one thing that we like to do every so often is talk about specifically one of his books, The Seven Grey Swans, trends that you really need to keep an eye on and that could threaten our financial future. It's the thing I love about this book. It's just big enough. It's a small book that contains a lot of great information. Doesn't take very long to read it, and you have no excuse not to get up the curve on what is sitting out there and what you need to know about. So you can get more information on this at crown.org, and that's where also you can ask Chuck a question if you need to. Do you let's say that we have a switch of candidates, and it's a situation where President Biden's not running. How likely do you think it is that they could make this and turn this into a push to make happen?
Well, I don't know. You're asking me a very difficult question, Bob. I would rather hear your answer on that. That reminds me a little bit what Yogi Berra once said. He said, forecasts are very difficult, especially about the future. And, we don't know what's going to happen there. I would say what is important to me is that we return to a sense of confidence in our candidates and in the election process itself.
Yes.
And that we uphold the rule of law. And I think underneath the surface, everybody is concerned about those issues. That are we really going to have an election where people trust the results and that the process is honored so that we can have confidence and stability? I think that's the bigger issue. Obviously, if there's a surprise candidate on either side, it's going to be wild. I think that we have to remember this is not our home. I think we get fearful, especially around election times. Politics is really dominant in our minds now. It's dominating the media. You cannot escape it. But we're far more than our politics. When you get away from all of that, you see, like I was just thinking where I live right now, things are great. We're not hating each other. We're not fighting each other. We're getting along. Our society's functioning well. Economy's stable and growing. And it's almost like this is being forced down into our mindset, when in reality we're doing pretty well at a local level.
Let's talk a little bit about digital currency. It's interesting. If you look at the statistics, about 80% of all transactions, kind of follows the 80-20 rule, according to the experts. 80% of all transactions are digital transactions. And, of course, the Federal Reserve Board they say that they're working on a switch over to a digital dollar. Talk a little bit about what that is and why you feel like that's a gray swan.
Well, I do think it is definitely a gray swan, and one that everybody should be aware of, because we're moving more and more to a cashless society. Central banks believe they're going to have to compete with these independent sources of digital currency like Bitcoin or stable coins. And so they're talking about central bank digital currency, CBDC. And I think it's inevitable. I personally believe that it's coming and that we need to be prepared for it. I can't tell you how soon or how complete it will be, but I'm a proponent of people using cash. Cash allows us privacy, and privacy allows for freedom. The counter argument is, well, if you're doing nothing wrong with money, why should you be fearful? I agree with that argument, except for the fact that all of us need to be able to make financial decisions and place funds where we want them to go without having to be scrutinized, particularly in our charitable giving and in our travels. I would hate there to be a day when an edict might be issued to say, we're not going to allow this guy to board the plane. We're not going to allow that ticket to be purchased. We're not going to allow that charitable gift to be made. Privacy is a wonderful thing, and it's really foundational to having economic freedom.
Chuck, the question that I get a lot, and I'm sure you get this as well, where does cyber currencies fit into the order of things? Bitcoin and that type of thing. Could that be a currency? I mean, the current currency.
Well, yeah, I think it's got the hallmarks of being able to create what I would consider a universal currency, where you try to do away with the variations between currency exchanges by having some sort of immediate adjustment wherever you go or travel. And I think that it makes some sense economically, logistically, efficiently. All of that is certainly where I think we're headed. In the meantime, I think as believers, we need to be very aware that using our cash and being proponents of economic privacy, thus economic freedom, is a great position to take and to stand on. I don't think we need to be soft on speaking up about our need for freedom when it comes to financial decisions.
Talk what you mean about modern monetary theory. This is probably something a lot of people don't really understand.
Well, if you look it up, it's actually an economic theory that people who print their own currency can print it into infinity without consequence. The idea, some people call it the monopoly money theory, is that if you're the banker in Monopoly, you can just keep putting money into the system without consequence. And they particularly say that debt doesn't matter for people who print their own currency because they can pay off their own debt by printing more money. And it's really, it sounds on the surface like they could be right, but when you analyze it more deeply, you realize that it could create a currency crisis, a crisis of confidence, because at some point, all systems of currency are built on whether or not people trust them. And so we are practicing modern monetary theory right now. That's how our government functions. We believe that we can do whatever we want. You look at some of this legislation of, we're going to send this many billions to this country or this many billions for this bailout program, and it makes no sense in terms of how we're ever going to pay it back. And so we're creating mountains and mountains of debt, which is not sustainable, especially in a rising interest rate environment. So I don't like modern monetary theory, but we're practicing it, and we need to speak up about it and ask our government, whether it's local, state, or federal, to live within our means and to have constraint on how much money we print.
And it's a practice that is just no big deal anymore. Do you want to send $100 billion here or $100 billion there or whatever the number is? It's I remember, Chuck, 10, 15 years ago that it was a big deal if you spent that kind of money, but today it's just no big deal. And that has a lot of unintended consequences that could occur because of it.
Well, no doubt about it, Bob. I mean, currency is only as good as its guarantee, as the promise that it makes, that it's worth what it says it's worth. And when people lose confidence in it, they run from it. And when you run from it, it can collapse. And actually, if you look at the history of a currency collapse, it always occurs when two things happen. One is when there's excessive runaway debt, and second is when political instability happens and people don't believe that there's anybody driving the bus, that it's off the rails. That's why I think we've got the potential for those two things to happen to America, where we lose political stability while also having runaway debt. And I think modern monetary theory and the idea that we're headed into a very contentious election is a dangerous time for us.
You know what's interesting? You could have written this book this year, and it would be so applicable to what's going on.
Well, it's 4 years old, Bob, and in some ways,
I know that's unbelievable.
I was a man before my time. It just seemed to be getting worse.
So let's talk about what you mean by democratic socialism.
Yeah, what I mean by that is it's a new way to describe a political philosophy moving towards socialism, which is a centralized economy where the government picks the winners and losers, and the government picks who they're going to heavily tax and control, and who they're going to redistribute funds to. It's a fancy way of trying to minimize people's concern about outright socialism, but it's not in line with what you and I would know as historically as liberalism. Liberalism was whether or not you believed in a balanced budget or not. Well, democratic socialism isn't even close to that. It does embrace modern monetary theory. It does embrace redistribution of wealth. It does embrace centralized control over the economy with the idea of a utopian equality, which we all know doesn't work. And the problem is that the younger generation is starting to see this philosophy as a Christian view.
Really?
And if you ask young people, do they believe in it? Most of them would say, yes, that's what Christ would teach. And that's where it gets scary to me.
Yeah, and we'll have to pick up on the rest of these next time. But I wanted a couple of things about what you're talking about with democratic socialism. It seems to me, and I would love your comments on this, that this really, if this movement gets stronger, you have, you have more of that in the White House for the next 4 years, or even 8 years, that lays the ground of the foundation for these other gray swans to really start to mature.
Well, yeah, you're exactly right. But it's not just this current election, Bob. It's the entire education system that is preparing young people to see that democratic socialism is a utopian form of government that needs to replace what we would call a traditional capitalistic philosophy. And they see that as evil. They see that as greedy people wanting to, take from others, kind of like, all wealthy people are bad. That philosophy of the 1%ers and the privileged wealth, that's being driven into the minds of our young people through our training, our academic systems. And so that needs to be counterbalanced with true biblical teaching of what God said about economics.
Well, the book is Seven Grey Swans, written by Chuck Bentley, who's my guest today. And Chuck, always good talking to you. We'll pick up where we left off next month, so I want to talk a little bit more about this. And hey, as always, thanks for coming on the program.
Appreciate you, Bob. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. If you got a question for me, please go to the website at prudentmoney.com and send it in, because we are all out of time. Till we do meet again next time, keep the faith and have a great rest of the day.
That's all the time we have for today. Questions or comments for Bob, or to find out more great information like what you've just heard, visit www.prudentmoney.com. Be sure to join Bob Brooks again for the next edition of Prudent Money.